Hey everybody, happy Halloween. It is Thursday, October 31st, 2024. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, big costume plans today?
There's a Halloween parade at my daughter's school. So the kids will be dressing up, but not me.
No, but I think I saw on the gram. I think you dressed up over the weekend at least, right?
I did, but that was a one-time thing. That was for a Halloween party. I don't think I'm going to dress up to trick or treat.
What was that costume?
It was a black cape. That was it.
it's like the people in college, like the women in college who were like, I'm a cat. Here are my cat ears.
My husband and I went to a Halloween party a few years ago and we wore black capes and kind of the like a mask, like a masquerade mask. Mm-hmm. And we still had the capes. And so I just put it on and I wore all black and I was like, I'm going with it. That's it.
Well, here in New York City, little Olivia, who doesn't really remember last Halloween because she was like 5 weeks old. She probably is never going to remember this Halloween either.
Remember this
one. She'll be going as Snow White, and Alex and I are both going as Sleepy, the dwarfs, for obvious reasons.
You guys are really nice because my son, who is 2, I was going to just ignore the holiday entirely and not trick-or-treating because I feel like he's not going to remember it. He doesn't know what he's missing, and it's a lot harder for me if he's running around and I have to also watch my daughter.
Well, I was never a big Halloween person. My daughter at age 1, I think, has dressed up and has more costumes than I've done my entire life. But I've married a Halloween person, and so you have to lean in.
You married in.
I married into Halloween, everybody.
All right. Well, Halloween or not, we got to get to some news.
We do. I do want to apologize to the candy corn people. Some people are like, Moshe, I was drinking my coffee yesterday morning, listening to my favorite podcast, and I was attacked. I was attacked by both of you when it comes to candy corn. So I just want to say, it's one of the reasons we don't take positions on this podcast. I don't want to upset people. You have a right to like candy corn. That's okay. I just, I was open with my opinion about it, and I hope that those of you who are still here today, even if you like candy corn, I appreciate you sticking with us. And I'm sorry to have upset you yesterday morning.
Moshe, I also heard from some people who said they love candy corn and that they were upset and that they were upset listening to the podcast, which is the opposite thing that we are going for here.
We want this to be a welcoming place, and we're sorry that for candy corn people, it was an unwelcoming place yesterday.
We are nonpartisan on everything from politics to candy. Okay?
No, we're partisan. I mean, it's evident that we're partisan on candy. I just didn't think that it would hit people so emotionally.
All right, speaking of partisanship, 5 days until Election Day, Kamala Harris is now trying to clean up a Joe Biden gaffe.
Yes, the tides have turned. The Democrats were on the offense there with the comedians' remark about Puerto Rico, and then Joe Biden gave Republicans a gift.
What a new poll says about the state of the so-called blue wall, that's Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Speaking of Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is claiming some voter fraud in the state.
Yeah, we'll break down the allegations and the reality in Pennsylvania.
Overseas, Spain battles its deadliest flood disaster in decades. To the Middle East, why Lebanon's leader says that there could be a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah within days. And to Gaza, some reporting on what Donald Trump told Benjamin Netanyahu about a timeline for ending the war if he were to win the White House. Back at home, the economy's hot streak continues. And in New York City, some news for all of you impatient people. Jaywalking is now legal.
I'm walking here. Beware, though, folks. That's a dangerous move here in New York City sometimes.
And Moshe, a viral appetizer has been sending sales at Chili's surging. I want my baby back, baby back. Commercials
were so good back then, but we also remember them because we had to actually sit through them.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
We dive into the origins of Halloween today, Jill, how far it goes back.
Okay, 5 days until Election Day. 55 million Americans have already voted. Both former President Trump and Vice President Harris were in Wisconsin on Wednesday night holding dueling campaign events. And now it is Kamala Harris doing cleanup this week for someone else, this time for a comment made by President Biden. So on Wednesday, Harris distanced herself from Biden's comments that referred to Trump's supporters as, quote, garbage. Those comments from Biden were made on a Zoom with Latino voters, and they were in response to Donald Trump's rally on Sunday at Madison Square Garden. As we have reported, a comedian described Puerto Rico as a, quote, floating island of garbage. So here is Harris on Wednesday.
First of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
So, Jill, after Democrats felt like they had some wind at their back with those remarks by that comedian, being able to attack Trump, being able to try to gain an advantage against Trump in the Puerto Rican community, which is votes in good numbers there in Pennsylvania, President Biden said, hold my beer. I got something to say here. And so they had him on this low-pressure Zoom with Voto Latino on the same day, within hours of Harris giving her closing remarks in a very carefully choreographed address, beautiful backdrop with the White House, 70,000 people in the National Mall. She's making her case, on her policies, that Trump is dangerous, that yada, yada, yada. And lo and behold, the headlines that break within minutes of that carefully written practice speech. Do you know what your boss just said on a Zoom? Half of America is garbage. And so there you had it. As each one of these news cycles counts in these final days here. Biden stepping all over Harris's speech.
Now, in terms of Biden's clarification, he did put out a statement on X or Twitter saying that he was simply referring to the hateful rhetoric, not to all of Trump's supporters. But Moshe, just an unforced error.
Yes, they actually tried to play the grammar game, Jill, saying that he was referring to supporters with an apostrophe rhetoric as garbage and not the supporters, no apostrophe, as garbage. Didn't really play very well, though.
Right. And it was just an unforced error that Trump jumped on.
My response to Joe and Kamala is very simple. You can't lead America if you don't love Americans. You just can't. And you can't be president if you hate the American people. And there's a lot of hatred there.
Some Harris staff have reportedly said they are furious over the distraction as she campaigns in the battlegrounds of Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And she is trying to project this message of unity. But Jonah Goldberg from The Dispatch, who Moshe, you happened to interview for the Interview podcast, which is out today, he made an interesting point that maybe this is actually an opportunity for Harris to try to differentiate herself from her current boss.
Yeah, and she took little time with her answer to do just that. We played a bit of that just a couple moments ago there, though she's had a difficult time. There's no clear answer. And this is something I talk about with Jonah on the Mo.news interview podcast today, that she still doesn't have a great answer for what she would do different from Joe Biden, how she will be different from Joe Biden, and she's struggling with that. Nonetheless, they want to put Joe Biden in the rearview mirror. It's one of the reasons we joked earlier this week that they've effectively ghosted Biden from the campaign trail, and I think this only reinforces that move here. And it comes as we're seeing multiple polls out right now from the battleground states with days to go. CNN has a few polls out. Harris, an ever so slight lead in Wisconsin and Michigan. Trump and Harris tied in Pennsylvania. Those are the CNN polls. Then you have the Fox News polls. Michigan, Harris 49, Trump 49. Pennsylvania, Trump 50, Harris 49. North Carolina, Trump 50, Harris 49. Margin of error plus or minus 3. Jill, like we've been telling you for months, this thing is a jump ball. We have a tie here, unless, of course, all the polls are off in one direction, in which case one candidate will clearly win. But have they corrected for 2020 and 2016? That's another topic that came up in a recent Mo News interview pod. So we got a lot over there on the interview pod. Definitely check it out if you want to dive into various topics right now. And it comes as Trump appears to be laying groundwork here for being able to claim a state had fraud in it if he's down. This is something he tried in 2020, and it looks like he's doing again here. He already has declared that Pennsylvania is rife with fraud and misconduct and telling his supporters to go to the police. He says that the state is cheating, getting caught at large-scale levels. He hasn't really been very specific, but there's a couple instances here that he might be referring to. In one case, there was a situation in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where a woman was arrested for encouraging people to stay in line and vote even after the time had passed. Now, the Trump people are claiming she was a conservative, and this was an active suppression of voting rights. In a statement, authorities in Delaware County from both parties said the woman was being disruptive, belligerent, attempting to influence voters in line. That breaks federal law. That's why she was arrested here. Another situation, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Trump claims that people were caught with fake ballots and forms. In reality, the Lancaster Board of Elections said in a statement that there were 2,500 suspected fraudulent voter registration applications that were dropped off in 2 batches. They were going through all of them. They found all of them. They say that this, if anything, shows the security system is working. We're not talking about any votes here or ballots. We're talking about registrations, faulty registrations, and the Pennsylvania authorities caught all of that. And then there's another situation in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. That's where a judge has granted a request from the Trump campaign to order a 3-day extension to the in-person mail-in ballot deadline. That's now extended through the end of the week. The judge said that the county violated the election code of the state by turning away voters who sought to apply for a mail-in ballot and receive one in person before the deadline. So now they've extended that. So some small instances here, but it does go to show how much scrutiny this is. The strategies here, both campaigns have lawyered up at an unprecedented level. And so they're prepared for whichever states are the most competitive. They'll scrutinize every single county, every single allegation here. And you see that already happening. Also, a quick update on those ballot box fires that we told you about earlier this week that destroyed a couple of hundred ballots in Washington state and Oregon. The New York Times and ABC News reports that a pro-Palestinian message reading "Free Gaza" and "Free Palestine" appeared on the devices that were dropped into the ballot boxes in Monday's arsons. They took place 15 miles from each other in Portland and then in the city of Vancouver, Washington. Jill, just another story that is getting a lot of traction online that we wanted to address. A local ABC station in Pennsylvania over the weekend was testing its election graphics and accidentally had them go live over the weekend. Oh, God. If you've ever worked in TV, you know you got to prepare the systems. You got to put in fake numbers for rehearsals. Well, it turns out that this local ABC station hit the wrong button for their practice session, and it went live on air. And it showed Harris beating Trump, about 5 million votes cast, 52-47. That, of course, has led to now conspiracy theories that this whole thing is rigged. Elon Musk is retweeting them right now. Again, I've been explaining to folks, this is something we did every election cycle. At CBS, we needed to have numbers so we could look at the graphics, we could practice, what would we do in this scenario? What would we do in this scenario? And that's something we always did. Some folks out there in the mo.news land suggesting, why don't they just use fake candidates like Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse? And then I'm like, well, then all the graphics people and the back-end computer programming people would have to then reprogram Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse the day of the election. And then you have the opposite issue, which is on election night, we could declare that Mickey Mouse has won Wisconsin. And that wouldn't go over well either.
Maybe it would, actually.
You're like, wait, it's too close to call between Mickey and Donald. Wait, what? Donald who? Donald Duck, not Donald Trump.
Remember when Chris Christie tried to make that happen?
Yes,
Donald Duck.
Donald's ducking the debate. He's Donald Duck. And I'm like, Chris Christie.
It's
but
just not going to happen.
It worked on you, Jill. You still remember it.
Yes, I'm the only person.
You're like, Chris Christie really had me when he was like, Donald won't debate with us. He's Donald Duck. He's ducking the debates.
Yes, I'm literally the only person who remembers that. Okay, another important election story that we will be watching, all of the various legal issues and the Supreme Court getting in on the action. They issued a decision yesterday that will impact just over 1,000 votes in Virginia. The decision itself was surprising, as was the fact that they decided to weigh in on this at all. So the Supreme Court allowed the state of Virginia to move forward with its purge of about 1,600 residents that it believes are non-citizens from its voter rolls just days before the election. The court granted the request Wednesday without explanation. The 3 liberal judges dissented. Virginia had asked the justices to intervene after lower court judges found that Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin's executive order violated a 90-day, quote, quiet period. That is a federal law that limits purges within 90 days of the election due to potential errors. The order from Youngkin requires DMV data be checked daily against voter rolls to identify non-citizens.
Yeah, so while Virginia is not a swing state, it's still notable here, this decision. It does impact, of course, Virginians. Again, no issue, generally speaking, with purging voter rolls. That's super important. But there was this federal law that banned purging within 90 days since mistakes happen. In fact, there was a situation in Alabama with a voter purge that found that 2/3 of the voter registrations that they thought were non-citizens actually turned out to be citizens. The DMV, they just checked the wrong box. So the issue here was, do you weigh the rights of legit citizens and a mistake preventing them from voting more than the non-citizens actually registering to vote? In this case, the Supreme Court rules with Virginia saying they can do this. It's super important to make sure non-citizens are not registered to vote. And those who err here apparently are flagged. The state contacts them, and they have 2 weeks to dispute things. And Virginia, with same-day registration, leads the Supreme Court to believe here, apparently, that if you are a legit citizen and they accidentally remove your voter registration, that there are ways to resolve that. Of course, that might mean that you have to spend more time on Tuesday, on Election Day. So Virginia was doing this. Alabama was doing this. Alabama did not appeal to the Supreme Court, so they just ruled in Virginia's case here.
Time for the speed read. Let's start overseas from the BBC. Spain is enduring its worst flooding disaster in decades, with at least 95 people dead and dozens more missing after huge rains swept the eastern province of Valencia and beyond. Torrential rain on Tuesday triggered flash floods, which swept away bridges and buildings and forced people to climb onto roofs or cling to trees to survive. The president, Pedro Sanchez, has declared 3 days of national mourning as the extreme conditions continue, restricting some rescue efforts. The death toll is expected to climb because there are still so many missing people.
Yeah, this is the worst flooding death toll in Spain going back 50 years here. Some towns got a year's worth of rain on Tuesday in just a period of 8 hours. And there are widespread accusations in Spain that in many cases, disaster relief authorities were too slow to act with warnings, meaning people could not get off the roads or seek higher ground in enough time. So just a tragic situation we're watching right now in Spain.
Staying overseas from Reuters, Lebanon's prime minister expressed hope on Wednesday that a ceasefire deal between Hezbollah and Israel would be announced within days, as an Israeli media outlet published what it said was a draft agreement providing for an initial 60-day truce. The Israeli broadcaster said the leaked proposal was written by Washington and said Israel would withdraw its forces from Lebanon within the first week of the 60-day ceasefire. The Lebanese prime minister said he did not believe that a deal would be possible until after the presidential election on Tuesday. But he said he became more optimistic after he spoke on Wednesday with the U.S. envoy for the Middle East, Amos Hochstein. He was set to travel to Israel today. As we've been reporting, Hezbollah started to launch missiles at Israel shortly after the October 7th attacks in solidarity with Hamas. But the conflict in Lebanon has dramatically escalated over the last few weeks.
It does come down to Israel and Hezbollah here. The new leader of Hezbollah, we told you about him yesterday, who's based in Iran right now for his own safety, given his predecessors have both been killed in recent weeks by the Israelis, said that they will agree to a ceasefire based on certain parameters for Israel. It's not clear whether they will remove their troops from southern Lebanon, because Hezbollah basically has been sitting on the border. There's a UN resolution that has Hezbollah moving north of a river that they're supposed to fulfill. Hezbollah has not done that. So it's unclear, the devil is in the details, as they say, that they can actually come to a deal here. Jill, as we're talking about the region, some interesting reporting out of the Times of Israel from sources in both the U.S. and in Israel. Apparently, former President Trump has said to Benjamin Netanyahu that he wants Israel to wrap up the war in Gaza by the time he returns to office on January 20th. Remember, Trump hosted Netanyahu back in July at Mar-a-Lago. He talks to him on the phone all the time. He's been critical of Biden for putting too much pressure on the Israelis. And he apparently has said to the Israelis, do what you need to do, but I don't want to be dealing with this past January 20th. So unclear here exactly what the details are of that conversation, but still interesting as the issue of Israel and the Gaza war is one of the many issues voters are considering next week.
Back here in the U.S. from Axios, two big pre-election snapshots on Wednesday showed that the U.S. economy is still on a hot streak. The overall economy expanded at a rate of 2.8% annually in the third quarter, according to the Commerce Department, which is pretty good, Moshe. It wasn't that long ago that we were talking about being on recession watch, which would have meant negative growth.
Yeah, and so you had 3% growth earlier this year, now 2.8% growth. The other number that came out yesterday, private sector employers added 233,000 jobs in October. That's the strongest job creation it is reported in 15 months. So a couple strong numbers there. Again, we've been talking about this divide here, these numbers. You see the GDP is growing. You see the private sector employers are adding people, but there's still a feeling out there that people have that the economy isn't good. People still dealing with the effects of a couple years of inflation. And so the question is, can Harris benefit from these top line numbers? In previous election cycles, they have meant more. But given, again, the dichotomy here, the chasm between how people feel and some of these numbers, that's unclear.
From the New York Times, nearly 70 years ago, New York City began a campaign to warn pedestrians about the dangers of jaywalking. The slogan said, "Cross at the green, not in between." But telling New Yorkers who are famously short of patience and time not to cross the street mid-block did little to curb the illegal practice. Neither did the threat of fines. A violation carried a potential fine of up to $300. Hundreds of people actually receive tickets each year. And so after decades of mostly turning the other way, city officials have finally decriminalized jaywalking, which is crossing against a traffic signal or outside of a crosswalk. The city council passed a bill last month to allow pedestrians to cross the street wherever they please. No. And it did become law over the weekend after Mayor Eric Adams ran out of his allotted time to decide whether he was going to veto it or sign it.
So Adams not taking a position on this, but that is now the law here in New York City. Jill, I feel like I've jaywalked before right in front of NYPD officers. And like for a hot second, I was like, ooh, I wonder what they'll do. And then they didn't care.
They don't care.
No, they don't care.
Bigger fish to fry, Moshe.
Typically, and sadly, Jill, there was a discriminatory element to the numbers. You mentioned that several hundred people do receive fines every year for jaywalking. 92% of them were Black or Latino, and so the feeling was that it was being selectively enforced in certain neighborhoods. Now, these new rules do come at a time where traffic deaths have risen in New York City. You got those electric bikes and those bike lanes just racing. So definitely pay attention, folks. You got outdoor dining, congestion pricing, just a lot going on city streets these days that were not happening before. So 200 people have died over the last 5 years while crossing streets in the middle of a block or against the light. And so fair warning to all of you, while you no longer potentially could receive a fine from it, look both ways and, I don't know, wait.
Yes, jaywalk at your own risk. Actually, a friend of mine who is a New Yorker told me that when he went to Vancouver, Canada, he got a ticket there for jaywalking because he was just so used to jaywalking and not having any repercussions that he did it there. And he said that even the police there were so polite that they were like, "We're really sorry, but we have to give you a ticket."
I think this happened to me a few times. People knew that I'd lived too long in New York, that I moved to New York in 2009, and like a couple years in, I was like starting to act like a New Yorker, and I go back to Chicago, other cities, and they're like, "Wait, why do you think you can walk in the middle of the street like this?" I'm like, "In New York, we do it all the time. It's totally cool."
Okay, and finally, some food news from CNN. People apparently cannot get enough of the Big Smasher Burger, $6 margaritas, and triple dipper combination platters at Chili's. Chili's. Brinker International, which is Chili's parent company, reported a 14% jump in sales as the chain continues to perform really strongly with promotions that target its fast food rivals and menu items that are going viral on TikTok. Brinker's CEO saying that rising prices at fast food restaurants sparked an advertising campaign for Chili's. So they promoted a Big Smasher for $10.99 to rival McDonald's Big Mac, which is continuing to win with guests and significantly driving traffic up. Chili's launched that meal deal back in April, describing it as having twice the beef of a Big Mac and flavors fast food lovers will recognize. The meal also includes unlimited refills of a non-alcoholic drink, bottomless chips with salsa, and French fries.
And heartburn. Some heartburn comes as a side there.
With a side of heartburn.
With a side of heartburn. So the CEO says that customers are actually telling employees the burger looks just like the ad, which you never get from fast food, right? It always, because they're never actually using the food in the ad. But this is a success story for Chili's, benefiting here from TikTok, things going viral on TikTok, where customers are filming their combinations, they're raving about it. So interesting, again, how social media plays a role here in making certain food items go viral. All right, Jill, now time for On This Day in History. And what better thing to do on Halloween than look back at the history of Halloween, which we believe a version of got started back in the area that is now Ireland more than 2,000 years ago by the Celts. So there was an ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. The day marked the end of the summer and the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was associated with human death. They celebrated it on November 1st. And so the Celts believed on that night before the new year. And so the Celts believed that on that night, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. They would build huge bonfires. People would burn crops and animal sacrifices to the deities, the gods of the Celtic people. They would wear costumes. That's where that got started, consisting of animal heads and skins, etc. So the Romans conquer all of Europe, effectively, including the islands there, including what would become Ireland, right? The British Isles. And so the Romans have their own holidays, but they're getting influenced here by the Celtics. And of course, the Roman Empire converts to Christianity a couple hundred years later, and the influence of Christianity now spreads to the Celtic lands, and all these things start to get blended. And so then by the year 1000, so a little over 1,000 years ago, the Catholic Church makes November 2nd All Souls Day, a day to honor the dead. Now, it's widely believed that the church was attempting to replace the Celtic festival that had become very popular across Europe, and they wanted to replace the Festival of the Dead with a church-sanctioned holiday, All Souls Day. Now, another version of it, based on the old Middle English Celtic language, was All Hallows Eve, the word hallow there, so hallows, Halloween. We eventually adopted here in colonial America. Gradually, it starts to come over here. But we have to thank the Irish immigrants in the late 1800s for really making it go big in the U.S. Remember, the initial folks who came to the U.S., the Pilgrims, etc., weren't into all these holidays. And it was the Irish immigrants about 100 years ago that say, Halloween, you're going to have some fun with it. And Jill, I will say personally, I got to experience Halloween in Dublin a few years ago, and it is a lot of fun.
I think Halloween can be pretty fun, Moshe, especially for kids, and for adults too, which, we never get to dress up and just be silly and have fun. So,
somebody earlier in the podcast said she wasn't dressing up. I wonder if that's going to change. Jill, that's our Halloween history. One other item of note here, since we always end with music. Bohemian Rhapsody was released on this day in 1975. Galamouche, Galamouche.
I was going to go with Easy Come, Easy Go.
Well, yeah,
They all work.
The song is like a 3-hour-long song, so pick your favorite part.
All right, guys. Before this podcast becomes 3 hours, thank you for listening to the Mo.news podcast. A lot of news. Thanks for bearing with us as we try to really hit all of the election headlines and the things that everyone's going to be talking about. And guys, only 5 more days. That's it.
Only 5 more days. We got some special episodes over on the Mo News interview podcast. So search that on your podcast platform and go check out. We got deep dives into the economy, worst case scenarios, and some other stuff coming up for you over on that podcast as well.
All right. Bye, everyone.